Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called The Crestfallen Sun, written by PerilousPlatypus. Chet let his feet dangle, the leather soles of his boots bumping against the rune-plate pauldron as Thero lumbered along. With every step, the young boy found something new to comment on. The wonders of the forest never dull in his eyes. Animals, trees, shrubs, creeks. On occasion, Thero would grunt, which seemed to be all of the encouragement Chet needed to continue his monologue. "There's a new tree, I think," Chet thumped into the pauldron and pointed, his grubby finger stabbing in the direction of no fewer than a dozen trees. "See, it has red bark, but different red bark than the other red bark tree." He paused for a moment, considering. "There's a lot of bark here." Thero didn't opine on the relative barkiness of bark, his focus on making his way through the densely packed woods. It was an arduous process, particularly given Chet's deep dismay whenever Thero's magi suit uprooted a tree or trampled upon a flower. Things would be far simpler if Chet were content to ride in the squire pouch, but the boy was deeply unwilling to be confined. Understandable, given what the boy had endured. And there was no rush to be any place other than this one. Thero had retrieved the boy and was now content to let time pass with him, wandering their way through the wilds beyond the Crestlands. It was a simple and deep pleasure, one that Thero had not known for many years. The dents and scars on his magic plate were evidence enough of that. Of course, given the volume and quantity of Chet's babbling, perhaps peace was an overstatement of the current situation. "Lord Gurza, what are you?" Chet began. "Just Thero," Thero broke in. "There is no lord here." Thero had explained this to the boy before, but old habits were hard to overcome, particularly when they had been formed with a stick. To Chet, there could be not a magi without a lord. They were inseparable. But Chet had never known a Crestfallen. Awkward silence settled between them as Chet made another attempt to reconcile the situation with the word he had known. The boy had spent his whole life in service of the grinding machinery of the Crestlands, and precious few weeks free. "Why," he trailed off, gathering his resolve, "why did you bring me?" That was a complex question, one that Thero had difficulties answering. He had steadfastly maintained affection for the boy, disguising their jaunt as a mission on behalf of their crest lord. But the truth was simpler. Thero was tired. For hundreds of years he had willingly done the bidding of his crest lord. Countless thousands slaughtered, many more brought to heel and enslaved for no other reason than the crest lord willed it. Thero had been the Iron Fist, doling out destruction and horror. It is what he'd been trained to do, what he was sworn to do. And then suddenly he felt willing to do it no more, as if each act of violence had been a drip of water slowly filling a dam until it became too much to hold back. So Thero had taken the boy and left, an act of kindness. It would never be enough to balance the scales, but it would at least make sure there was something on the other side. "A magi needs a squire," Thero replied. Chet nodded at that, it being a sensible thing to say to his understanding of the world, save for one issue. "But I'm not a squire." Thero snorted. "You know more than any 5 whelps brought up in the houses. For a mission such as this, I could accept nothing less." Chet looked around, his gaze sweeping through the woods. It's a strange mission, though, isn't it? The boy had already identified any number of oddities, primary among them the absence of a retinue and his attendant supply train. A magi was a fearsome thing, but it was a thing that required resources and support. Thero had brought neither with them. He had simply taken the boy and then taken his leave. "All missions have their peculiar traits," Thero replied. "Like not calling you lord?" "Among other things." "What must we do on this mission?" Chet had asked this question before. He received the same answer as before. "It is a secret." "When do I get to know?" "Once we get to where we're going." "Where's that?" Chet said. "Further." Chet wiped his forehead with the back of his forearm and frowned at glittering runes as they shifted along the surface of Thero's armored wrist. "You really need a mana flush." Chet unscrewed a knob and let a few drips of muddy blue liquid drip into his finger. He stuck out his tongue and tasted it. The face scrunched up as the acrid taste. "Yeah, that's not good." Thero watched Chet quietly, amusement corking up in the corner of his lips. Watching Chet at work always delighted Thero. The boy was a gifted mechanic, though his enslavement had prevented him from progressing into that role. Instead, Chit had been a scrubber, tasked with thoroughly cleaning the magi after they had been in the field. It was a time-consuming and dangerous process, but Chit had always managed it better than any squire. "Are there any other issues?" The boy was frowning now. "There doesn't need to be any other issues. This is the one that matters. Did you bring any more mana?" Thero shrugged. "Fresh out." Chit's frown deepened. "When will we get new supplies?" "Later." "What? The build-up will start hurting the channels before too long." Chit's nimble fingers pried open the wristplate, shifting it away from the in-ruined mail beneath. These ruins were connected through a complex network of conduits, circulating mana through them like blood in veins. They were redundant channels, but backlogs could impair combat effectiveness. With enough of them, the plate would seize up, entombing the knight within. Eventually, the knight's body, no longer sustained by the magi, would wither and die. It was not a desirable death by magi knight standards. Thero took in their surroundings as Chit scrambled about, tinkering with the magi-suit. They were well into the wilds now, having made their way over mountain passes and into the foothills beyond. The dense forest had returned after they had descended from the heights, and Thero now searched for signs that they were approaching the plains beyond. If he could last until then, there would be a good chance of finding Chit a proper home. A long groan sounded out. "See, look!" Chit exclaimed, his fingers pointing at the rune located in Thero's knee. The rune fading, noticeably darker than those further up Thero's leg. The main channel leading to the runes no longer glowed blue at all. "Blocked," grumbling. Chit opened up a kit attached to his belt and withdrew a long, slender brush topped with a thick bristle on top. This was followed by 2 small clamps, a pair of pliers, and a roll of bonding tape. "We didn't bring any spare channel lengths," he gave Thero an accusatory glare, "so I'm going to need to snip and push." He set out each of his tools on a cloth rag beside him and then hunched down, examining the offending channel. "You at least need a clean. This is just the start." There was a worried look in the eye, but Chit stayed focused on the task at hand. Eventually he fixed clamps on both sides of the blockage, tightening them until the flow of mana had fully stopped. Then he took one side of the clamped channel and pulled it up until it could get the pliers under it. He applied pressure to the channel until the pliers cut through. He then repeated the same process on the other side, taking care to dump the mana to the side. He then raised up the tube and closed one eye, looking within at the blockage. Chit picked up the brush and carefully inserted it in one side, pushing down until the contents of the tube landed on the laid-out rag. He immediately hunkered down, bringing his eyes close to the offending object. "Clumps, beginnings of crystallization." He picked it up and rubbed it between his fingers before bringing it up to his nose and taking a whiff. "Ferro." Another whiff. "Definitely ferro." He wiped the mess away and then returned to the tube, pushing the brush back and forth until the channel was clear of any obvious contaminants. There was some risk of organics entering the tube while it was exposed to the air, but it couldn't be helped. A theoretical organic bloom in the channels was preferable to an actual blockage being removed. After the tube was cleaned, Chit repositioned it back along its groove in the armor and began the process of reseating it with the bonding wrap. He pulled the wrap over and around with even, deliberate movements, taking care to smooth out any potential bubbles. Once he was sure the wrap was properly applied, he sat back on his haunches and looked up at Thero, his concern plain. "This is bad," Chit said, the small smile still on Thero's face. "It is expected." "Of course it's expected. That's why you gotta have supplies." He looked exasperated now. "They're not required for this mission." Chit looked pleading now, his eyes beginning to water. "What is the mission? I can't—" He gestured helplessly to the repair channel. "I can't fix you with just the stuff. I need a workshop. Maybe if you had a real squire, but even then, they need stuff too." Thero leaned forward and placed a heavy, gauntleted hand on Chit's shoulder. "You're doing an excellent job. We needed to go much further." Chit's shoulders slumped, and then he nodded. "Okay, that's okay. We can go a little more." He met Thero's eyes. "Right?" Thero wobbled. He'd reached out and steadied himself, leaning against a nearby tree. His left leg had froze, locked into position by the lack of mana circulation. The flesh within the suit was numb as well, occasionally sending sharp spikes of pain as it was pinched against the immobile suit. The sensation was foreign and unsettling to Thero. Since he had been ensconced in the armor, it had been a part of him. The metallic plate no different than his own flesh. It was all one body, As the suit failed, the memory of being a man separated from this machine began to resurface. Chet walked beside him, having abandoned Thero's shoulder after the leg had frozen. The boy had tried to force Thero to stop so that he could investigate, but Thero refused. The Meji was beyond simple field repairs. They both knew it, but Chet was slow to accept the reality. The boy made his way along, careful to stay far enough away for Thero to see him. As the systems of the Magi gradually failed, Thero would have less and less awareness of his surroundings. Thero cautioned the boy, which had prompted another round of questions the nature of the mission. Sweat glistened on Thero's brow as he struggled with the dead weight of the leg, straining to maneuver it as best he could under manpower alone. He would stop and lean against a tree every so often to gather his breath, looking at the thinning forest for signs of the plains beyond. He could stop, but he couldn't rest. Sitting down would be a death sentence. He would never be able to stand again. Every step with his numb leg was a risk. Chet would hop along, calling out roots and rocks and showing the best path. "How will we get home?" Chet asked during one stop. There was no delaying it any further. Thero exhaled and nodded to the boy. "Hop up and give me a mop." Thero braced himself as Chet scrambled up, carrying a rag. After a few moments of dabbing and wiping, most of the sweat dripping into Theros' eyes had been removed. He took a few steadying breaths and glanced to the side, the movement of his head hampered by the locking plates. "We're not going back." Chet nodded, unsurprised. "Okay, but then what are we doing?" "Something good, for once." The rag twisted in Chet's fingers as he stared at Thero. "What's the mission?" "To find you a new home." Ahead, Thero could see the clearing of trees and the golden fields just peeking through beyond. He reached up and lay a hand on Chet and then settled him down on the ground. Moments later, there was a thunderous crash as Thero teetered over and then fell to the ground, landing roughly on his backside. Sharp pain shot up his leg, and blood began to leak through the armor. Chet screamed and then leapt forward, trying to get at the wound. Thero waved him off. "Back! Let me say what I want to say, and then let's leave it at that." But I can help. We can remove—" Thero chuckled. "I've been in this for 400 years, boy. I'm fused. No way out but death now." He winced, and then settled in slightly, pushing his back against the rock. "There's no going back. There is no fixing it. I'm Crestfallen." I know, but why?" "It was never going to end, and I wanted to. I wanted to do something. I wanted to—" a long swallow. "I wanted something on both sides of the scale." Thero reached down and pulled open a compartment, revealing a sack within. He emptied the sack once, the gold within clinked together. "You're a smart boy, but you're young and naive. Folks might try to take advantage of you. Pay attention. Don't show them the gold. Keep this stashed in a few different places." The river of blood was leaking through the armor now. Thero's vision began to dim, and he struggled to keep his focus. "Don't let anyone know about the armor. It's dangerous." He reached out a hand towards Chet, and the child took it, their eyes meeting. "Make the most of it. Do something worthwhile. Don't end up like me." Chet just stared, holding Theros' gaze until it fluttered, and he faded away. The Magi shuddered as the glowing runes along its length faded, and then went dark. "Thero!" There was no response. It took Chet the better part of a day to remove Thero from the armor. Thero had been right. The old knight was not easy to separate from his shell. It was a grisly task, but Chet refused to allow Thero to rot in the armor. He would be given a proper burial. It was the least Chet could do. Once the flesh was burned, Chet disassembled the armor and dragged the pieces to a nearby cave, carefully storing them. He took the time to catalogue the entire suit, taking special care to determine what repairs were necessary and what materials would be needed. He had little familiarity with the land Thero had brought him to, but he was fairly certain gold was a way to solve most problems. He needed a plan. The important thing was how to best make of the time that was available to him. He would not get revenge on the Crestfallen in a day, particularly not when it would take him years to grow into the armor. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.